The morning of their 60th wedding anniversary began with sunlight slipping through lace curtains, painting soft gold across the Evans bedroom walls. The house was alive with the hum of preparations, caterers in the kitchen, florists arranging orchids, the faint clatter of champagne glasses from the dining room. To everyone else, it looked like the perfect day for a perfect couple. To everyone but her. Margaret Evans, Maggie to her friends, sat at her vanity, brushing a few stray strands of silver hair back into place. The mirror reflected a woman who had spent her entire life mastering composure. Her pearl earrings gleamed, her lavender dress pressed smooth, her smile gentle and dignified. But behind her calm eyes, something was tired. 60 years. 60 years of birthdays, arguments, forgiveness, and the silent kind of loyalty that holds two people together long after love begins to fray. From downstairs, her husband's voice floated up, rich, charming, familiar. "Maggie, darling, the photographers will be here any minute. You ready to make me look good?" She smiled faintly at the mirror. "You never needed my help for that, Harold." He laughed, that same easy laugh that had once made her heart flutter. Once. As the morning rolled on, the house filled with the scent of roses and perfume. Old friends arrived early, bringing gifts wrapped in silver paper and stories that made everyone laugh. Harold, in his crisp navy suit, moved through the crowd like a practiced host, shaking hands, patting backs, basking in attention. Maggie watched him from the hallway. There was something mechanical in his charm now. His smiles were too wide, his eyes darted too often. She'd noticed that change over the years, the way he lingered too long on his phone, the late business meetings that had become routine, the faint scent of another woman's perfume clinging to his jacket. Still, she'd pushed it aside. Because after 60 years, you learn which truths are better left unspoken. Her daughter, Laura, entered with an armful of roses. "Mom, you look beautiful," she said, kissing her mother's cheek. "Dad's really going all out this year." Maggie turned from the mirror, her eyes soft but distant. "Your father always loved a good show." Laura frowned, sensing the heaviness in her mother's tone. "You okay? You seem somewhere else." "I'm fine, sweetheart," Maggie said, forcing a smile. "After 60 years, you stopped needing surprises." But even as she said it, a small knot formed in her chest, a knot that had been tightening for months. When Laura left the room, Maggie turned back toward the vanity. That's when she noticed it, an envelope, cream-colored, tucked neatly under the edge of the mirror. Her name written in cursive, Mrs. Margaret Evans. Her first thought was that it was another greeting card, maybe from an old friend. But something about the handwriting made her hesitate. She glanced toward the door. No one. Slowly, she tore it open. Inside was a single photograph. Her breath caught. It showed Harold, her Harold, standing outside a cafe she didn't recognize, his hand resting gently on the waist of another woman. She was younger, maybe mid-50s, elegant, with auburn hair and a smile that looked far too comfortable. Maggie's hand trembled. For a moment she couldn't breathe. The photograph wasn't old. The jacket Harold wore. She'd just had it dry cleaned last month. A soft ringing filled her ears. She looked closer. In the background of the photo, a sign read, "Riverside Inn." Her heart sank. The very same venue Harold had insisted they rent for tonight's celebration. A knock on the door made her start. "Mom," Laura's voice, "the car's here." Maggie quickly slipped the photograph back into the envelope, tucking it into her clutch. "Coming, dear," she called, forcing brightness into her voice. She took one last look at herself in the mirror. The woman staring back no longer looked merely tired. She looked awake. The ride to the Riverside Inn was filled with chatter. Harold cracked jokes, Laura scrolled through messages from guests, and Maggie sat quietly, the envelope burning in her purse. Outside, the town blurred past, the park where they'd once picnicked, the church where they'd married, the bakery that had made their wedding cake. So many memories, layered like fragile glass, beautiful, but one wrong touch and they'd shatter. Harold turned to her mid-drive, his hand brushing hers. "Can you believe it, Mags? 60 years. We must be doing something right." She smiled faintly. "Yes, Harold, we must." But her eyes stayed on the road ahead. When they arrived, the grand hall shimmered with candlelight. Gold banners draped across the walls, a slideshow of their old photos looping on a projector. Young Harold and Maggie on their honeymoon, the birth of Laura, Christmases, Vacations. The guests clapped when they entered. "Look at them," someone whispered. "The perfect couple." Maggie smiled gracefully, thanking everyone, hugging friends. But her mind kept replaying that photograph. Later, as she stood near the dessert table, a server brushed past and whispered something that made her freeze. "Mrs. Evans? A woman dropped this off earlier. Said it was for your husband." The server handed her a gift box, small, wrapped in gold paper. Maggie held it tightly. "Did she leave a name?" The server shook his head. "Just said she'd see him tonight." Maggie's fingers pressed into the wrapping paper, her pulse steady now. Not panicked, not afraid, just sure. For 60 years she had been the devoted wife, the quiet supporter, the woman behind the man. Tonight, she thought, staring toward the glowing ballroom doors, that story might finally change. The guests' laughter drifted through the ballroom like a melody Maggie could no longer hear. She stood by the window, the small gold box in her hands, her reflection flickering in the glass. From outside, the Riverside Inn glowed with fairy lights. It should have felt like a celebration, a lifetime of love, partnership, devotion, but all she could feel was the hum of betrayal beneath the music. She turned the box over slowly, her pulse steady but cold. There was no card, no label, just an expensive wrapping and a perfect bow. Harold was across the room, laughing too loudly with a group of old business partners. When his eyes met hers briefly, he raised his champagne flute and winked. It was the same playful wink he used to give her decades ago, before leaving for work, before she knew what absence really meant. She set the box down on the table and quietly stepped away. In the quiet of the hotel's powder room, Maggie unwrapped the gift. The paper peeled away easily, like silk surrendering. Inside was a sleek silver lighter, engraved with the initials H.E., her husband's initials. But beneath them, on the other side, was a smaller inscription, "Forever yours, E." Maggie's breath hitched. Her fingers closed around the lighter like a fist. E. Her mind flashed back to the photograph, the auburn-haired woman smiling beside Harold. E. Elaine. The name surfaced suddenly, a faint echo from an old memory. Years ago, Harold had mentioned an Elaine Summers, an interior designer he'd hired to consult on the guest house project. Maggie had met her once, briefly. Polite, elegant, the kind of woman who wore diamonds like they were casual. She had been charming, too charming, and Harold had laughed with her in a way Maggie hadn't seen in years. Maggie returned to the ballroom, her heart heavy but her steps measured. She watched from afar as Harold greeted new guests, shaking hands, posing for photos. Every smile, every gesture, every word was polished. But now she could see what she'd missed for so long, the performance. The subtle flinch when someone mentioned loyalty. The quick change of subject when Laura talked about their family legacy. This wasn't love anymore. It was habit, wrapped in ceremony. And suddenly, Maggie felt tired of playing her part. She took a seat at a quiet table in the corner. Laura soon joined her, a soft concern in her eyes. "Mom, you sure you're okay? You've barely eaten anything." Maggie smiled faintly. "Oh, I'm fine, dear. Just taking it all in." Laura leaned closer. "You know, Dad's been acting strange lately. I caught him whispering on the phone last week. Said it was business, but..." She trailed off, hesitating. "But you didn't believe him," Maggie finished gently. Laura sighed. "No. And I hate thinking like that, but he's hiding something. I can feel it." Maggie placed her hand over her daughter's. "Then maybe tonight, dear, we'll both find out what it is." Laura frowned. "What do you mean?" "Nothing, love. Go enjoy yourself." Maggie's voice was calm, almost serene, but inside, something had shifted. After dinner, Maggie slipped away to the hotel lobby and approached the front desk. The young clerk smiled politely. "Good evening, ma'am. How can I help you?" Maggie leaned in slightly. "I just had a quick question. I believe a woman named Elaine Summers made a reservation here for tonight." The clerk glanced at the computer. "Yes, Mrs. Summers. Checked in an hour ago. Room 312, private suite." Maggie nodded slowly, her voice even. "Thank you, dear. That's all I needed." She turned away before her hands could tremble. It wasn't the confirmation that broke her. It was the calm that followed, the strange peace that comes when truth stops hiding. Back upstairs, Harold was giving a speech. His voice boomed over the crowd, thick with emotion and self-praise. "To 60 years with the woman who made me who I am," he said, raising his glass toward her. To Maggie, my partner, my friend, my rock. The guests applauded. Maggie stood, smiling as expected, her expression unreadable. Her mind, however, was elsewhere, on room 312, on the engraved lighter in her purse, on the anonymous envelope that had found its way into her dressing room that morning. Someone had wanted her to know. But who? After the speech, Harold made his way to her side, his arms sliding around her shoulders. "How'd I do?" he whispered, pride dripping from his voice. "You've always known how to impress an audience," she replied. He grinned, missing the edge in her tone. "Well, we have to look good for the papers tomorrow. They're sending someone from the Gazette to cover it." "How thoughtful," she said softly. 60 years of performance deserves a headline. Later, while guests danced to a slow tune, Maggie slipped away once more. She opened her clutch and looked at the photograph again. The Riverside Inn sign gleamed clearly in the corner of the image. The lighter rested beside it, catching the reflection of the chandeliers. Everything was falling into place, too perfectly to be coincidence. Her eyes hardened. She didn't want to fight. She didn't want to scream or cry. She wanted clarity. She took out her phone and called the inn's manager quietly. "Good evening, Mrs. Evans," the voice said warmly. "Everything satisfactory for your celebration?" "Yes, thank you," she replied, steady. "One small favor. I'd like to add a brief segment to the evening's presentation, something personal for my husband." "Of course, ma'am. Just email us the content and we'll cue it before the final toast." Maggie smiled faintly. "Perfect. Thank you." When she ended the tough call, she closed her eyes and drew a deep breath. For 60 years, Harold had told their story his way, his triumphs, his versions, his truths. But tonight, for the first time, the story would be hers. The ballroom gleamed like a dream that had taken 60 years to build. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over tables wrapped in ivory linens, each centerpiece a delicate tower of orchids and candles. Guests milled about in tuxedos and sequined gowns, the air thick with laughter and nostalgia. At the center of it all stood Harold Evans, every inch the devoted husband, shining smile, polished shoes, silver hair combed with care. Cameras flashed as he shook hands, hugged old friends, and told stories of the good old days. And beside him, Maggie Evans, elegant in lavender silk, smiled for the photos. But her smile was measured, and her eyes, those calm, timeless eyes, were somewhere else entirely. Inside her clutch rested the photograph, the lighter, and a USB drive she'd brought from home. Her secret presentation. The band struck up a waltz, soft and nostalgic. Harold took Maggie's hand and led her to the dance floor. The crowd cheered, phones raised high to capture the moment. "May I have this dance, Mrs. Evans?" he asked, voice honeyed with charm. She nodded. "You may, Mr. Evans. For old time's sake," he chuckled, spinning her lightly. "Can you believe it? 60 years. We've outlasted just about everyone." "Yes," she said, her tone even. "Outlasting doesn't always mean enduring." He blinked, surprised by the chill in her words. "What's that supposed to mean?" But she only smiled, leaning close. "Oh, Harold, not everything needs to be said out loud." For a moment they moved in perfect rhythm, the picture of devotion. But to anyone watching closely, the distance between them was unmistakable. Two bodies moving together, two hearts miles apart. Their daughter Laura watched from the crowd, uneasy. She had never seen her mother's face look like that, composed yet brimming with something sharp underneath. She turned to her husband, whispering, "Something's wrong. Mom looks different. Maybe she's just emotional," he murmured. Laura shook her head. "No, that's not sadness. That's resolve." As the song ended, Harold lifted Maggie's hand and kissed it for the cameras. Applause erupted. "Still as graceful as ever," he said, his voice carrying pride. Maggie inclined her head. "Practice makes perfect." Then, glancing across the room, her gaze froze. There, near the entrance, stood a woman in a deep emerald gown, elegant, poised, auburn hair glinting beneath the chandeliers. Elaine Summers. She had arrived. Harold noticed her too. For a brief second, his charming mask cracked, his smile faltered, his shoulders stiffened. Then he recovered, turning to greet another guest as if nothing had happened. But Maggie saw it. The twitch in his jaw, the quick swallow, the faint sheen of sweat forming under his collar. Elaine began making her way through the crowd, smiling at strangers, exchanging pleasantries as if she belonged. Some guests assumed she was a late arrival from Harold's work circle. Others simply admired her elegance. Maggie's lips curved faintly. Of course Elaine would show up. It wasn't enough to have him. She wanted to be seen. A few minutes later, Elaine approached. "Mrs. Evans," she said, voice soft and refined. "Congratulations on 60 years. What a beautiful celebration." Maggie turned to her slowly. "Thank you, dear. And you are?" Elaine smiled, a little too wide. "Elaine Summers. Harold and I worked together years ago. I just happened to be in town." "Ah, yes," Maggie said, pretending to recall. "The designer, wasn't it?" Elaine's smile flickered. "That's right." Harold appeared beside them, his timing too precise. "Elaine, I didn't realize you were—" He stopped when Maggie's eyes met his, calm and unreadable. "Oh, Harold," Maggie interrupted gently, "you should have told me you invited an old friend. I do like meeting the people who made such an impact on your life." The air around them tightened. Elaine's hand twitched, clutching her purse. "Well, I didn't want to intrude." "Nonsense," Maggie said smoothly. "It's a night for honesty and celebration, isn't it?" She motioned for the waiter. "Please, bring our guest a drink, something strong." Laura watched from across the room, uneasy. She didn't know who the woman was, but the tension was unmistakable. Her mother's politeness was too sharp, her smile too steady. Maggie's calm was not peace. It was precision. Later in the evening, as dessert was served and laughter returned, Maggie approached the event coordinator quietly. "Would you mind cueing a short video before my husband's final toast?" she asked. The woman smiled. "Of course, Mrs. Evans. Do you have the file?" Maggie handed over the USB drive. "Yes, it's labeled for Harold, Final Tribute. Please run it right after his speech." "Got it." Maggie's voice softened, almost tender. "And make sure everyone can see it." Back at the table, Harold leaned toward her. "You're full of surprises tonight. What's this about a video?" "Oh," she said, swirling her wine. "Just a little gift. A reminder of all our years together." He grinned. "I can't wait to see it." "I'm sure you can't," she murmured. The night deepened, the wine flowed, and the ballroom sparkled with cheer. But beneath the glitter, something dark and steady pulsed, a countdown only Maggie could feel. Every toast, every laugh, every "you two are an inspiration" pushed her closer to the moment. She watched Harold beam at their guests, his arm around her shoulders, his lies layered like wallpaper over the decades of her devotion. And when he kissed her cheek for the cameras, she didn't flinch, because she knew. In a few short moments, every smile in this room would fade, every mask would fall, and Harold Evans would finally meet the truth he'd spent a lifetime running from. The evening unfolded like an elegant play. Crystal laughter, the clink of glasses, the soft hum of a jazz trio near the stage. But beneath the glamour, an invisible tension pulsed through the air, thick enough to cut. Every time Maggie looked toward the crowd, she could see Elaine Summers weaving her way closer, her emerald gown catching the light, her smile polite, her confidence deliberate. She wasn't hiding anymore. Harold, on the other hand, looked less like a charming host and more like a man trapped in his own performance. The sparkle in his eyes had dulled. He laughed too loudly, he drank too quickly, and his hand kept brushing at his collar like it was suddenly too tight. Maggie sat at the head table, her posture graceful, her expression tranquil. Inside, though, her thoughts sharpened into focus. 60 years of loyalty, 60 years of playing the part of the steady wife. And now, at the end of that long performance, she was about to reclaim the final act. When the main course was served, Elaine finally reached their table. "Harold," she said softly, resting a hand on his shoulder. He jolted slightly, almost knocking over his wine. "Elaine, I didn't see you there. I just wanted to say how beautiful this celebration is." She smiled, her voice syrupy smooth. "It's rare these days to see such commitment." The pause in her sentence was deliberate. Maggie noticed. "So true," Maggie replied, her tone like porcelain, smooth, fragile, but cutting if you touch the edges wrong. "Commitment is a remarkable thing. It lasts only as long as the truth does." Elaine's smile wavered for half a heartbeat before she turned back to Harold. "I was just telling your wife how lucky you both are." Harold forced a laugh. "Yes, lucky indeed." He took Maggie's hand under the table, but she didn't squeeze back. She only said, in a voice soft enough for him alone, "Luck runs out, Harold. But memories, they tend to stay." As the waiters cleared plates, the band played something sweet and slow. The guests began moving toward the dance floor again. Laughter swelled, cameras flashed, and for a brief moment, the illusion of celebration returned. But Maggie's mind was steady on the plan she had set in motion. She watched the event coordinator walk toward the stage and give her a subtle nod. The USB had been loaded. The tribute video was ready. Soon. Laura noticed the exchange and came to her mother's side. "Mom, what's going on? You've been different tonight." Maggie turned to her daughter, eyes calm but knowing. "You'll understand soon, darling. Sometimes truth needs an audience." "Truth about what?" Before Maggie could answer, Harold called from across the room, "Laura, sweetheart, come help me with this toast." Laura hesitated, glancing between them. Maggie smiled. "Go on, dear. Let him have his moment." Harold climbed onto the small stage, microphone in hand. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, voice booming, confident, "thank you for being here tonight to celebrate 60 wonderful years with the most extraordinary woman I've ever known." Polite applause followed. Maggie sat still, a faint smile curving her lips. "I won't bore you with speeches," he continued, "but I will say this. I couldn't have done any of it without my wife, Maggie. She's my heart, my home, my everything." The crowd awed. He looked at her, eyes glassy with practiced sentiment, to 60 years, and hopefully a few more. He raised his glass high. "To Maggie." Everyone cheered. Glasses clinked, cameras flashed, and then, as Harold lowered his champagne, the projector screen behind him flickered to life. At first, it was harmless, sweet even, photos of a young couple, Harold and Maggie in black and white, their wedding day, their first house, their newborn daughter. Soft piano music filled the air. The crowd sighed in nostalgia. But then, the slides began to shift. The music faltered. A new set of photos appeared. Harold at the Riverside Inn, not with his wife, but with Elaine. The same image from the envelope, his arm around her waist, his face laughing, unguarded, happy. Gasps echoed through the ballroom. Harold froze. His glass slipped from his hand, shattering against the floor. Elaine's complexion went pale, her smile vanishing as guests turned to stare. Maggie didn't move. She sat perfectly still, hands folded in her lap. The next slide appeared, another photo of Harold and Elaine entering the same hotel, time-stamped just 3 weeks ago. Then a third. Harold at a cafe holding Elaine's hand across the table. Silence blanketed the room. Slowly, Maggie rose from her chair. The microphone lay abandoned at the podium. She walked up to it with steady steps, her heels clicking like a metronome of truth. She turned to the guests, her voice calm, clear, dignified. "Marriage," she began, "is built on trust. 60 years ago, I stood before family and friends and promised to share my life with a man who swore to honor me. Tonight, I discovered what he's been honoring instead." Her gaze slid toward Elaine, whose eyes shimmered with panic. "And I must say, you have fine taste in venues, dear. The Riverside Inn seems to suit you both beautifully." A few stunned murmurs rippled through the crowd. Harold's face burned crimson. "Maggie, stop this." "Oh, Harold," she said softly. "You've stopped it yourself." She looked back at the audience. "I didn't come here tonight to humiliate anyone. I came to tell the truth, because I've spent 60 years living in a lie I no longer recognize." And then she turned back toward him, voice lowering. "You see, while you were planning secret weekends, I was planning something else." She paused. Freedom. The crowd erupted, not in applause but in disbelief, whispers, and pity. Maggie handed the microphone back to the host, her composure unbroken. As she walked off the stage, passing Harold and Elaine frozen in place, she murmured, "Enjoy the rest of the evening. It's the last one we'll ever share." And with that, she walked toward the exit, calm, radiant, and utterly untouchable. The silence that followed Maggie's exit felt like an explosion without sound, just the echoing aftershock of truth that no one knew how to process. The projector screen still glowed in the background, frozen on the last image. Harold and Elaine's faces caught mid-laughter at the Riverside Inn. The guests, once tipsy with champagne and nostalgia, now sat motionless, mouths slightly open, eyes darting between Harold and the door where Maggie had disappeared. A single word floated through the air, whispered by someone near the back. "Scandal." Then another voice. "After 60 years?" The whispers multiplied. Harold stood at the center of it all, stone still, face ashen. His hand hovered uselessly near the microphone, his carefully rehearsed toast forgotten. For decades, he'd been the man who commanded rooms, who always had the last word. But now the room itself had turned on him. Elaine, trembling, tried to break the tension. "This isn't, she's exaggerating. Harold, say something." But Harold couldn't. His lips moved, but no sound came. It wasn't until the lights dimmed and the slideshow cut to black that the spell finally broke. The applause never came. Only murmurs like the low hiss of a storm receding. Backstage, in a quiet corridor, Maggie waited. She leaned against the cool marble wall, heart steady, her breathing calm. A small smile ghosted across her face, not one of triumph, but of release. After 60 years, the truth had finally walked into the light. She could hear the distant commotion from the ballroom, chairs scraping, guests whispering apologies, and Harold's strained voice trying to explain what couldn't be explained. The manager of the inn approached, hesitant. "Mrs. Evans, are you all right?" Maggie turned toward him, her expression serene. "Perfectly," she said, "and thank you for your discretion." He nodded slowly. "Should I stop the event?" She shook her head. "No, let it finish. The celebration should continue, just not for me." And with that, she walked toward the back doors and stepped out into the cool night air. Outside, the moon hung low over the river, silver light rippling across the dark water. The laughter and music had faded behind her, muffled by thick walls. Maggie stood by the railing and exhaled, long, slow, and free. A car pulled up nearby. It was Laura. Her face was pale, eyes wide from what she had just witnessed. "Mom," she said softly, getting out of the car. What was that?" Maggie smiled faintly. That, sweetheart, was the truth finally standing up for itself. Laura stepped closer. "You knew? How long?" "For longer than I wanted to," Maggie replied, turning her gaze to the river. "The late nights, the forgotten anniversaries, the little lies that piled up. But I didn't have proof. Not until that photograph arrived." "Who sent it?" Laura asked. "I don't know," Maggie said quietly. "But whoever it was, they gave me the last piece of courage I needed." Laura's eyes filled with tears. "You didn't have to go through with it like that, in front of everyone." Maggie turned to her daughter, her voice soft but firm. "Oh, yes, I did, because Harold never believed in quiet lessons. He needed the lights, the audience, the applause. So I gave him all of it, just not the ending he expected." Back inside, chaos had replaced elegance. Elaine had vanished into the night, leaving behind her clutch and her half-finished glass of wine. Harold sat slumped at the table, surrounded by the remnants of what was once his kingdom: crumbled cake, spilled champagne, and guests who wouldn't meet his eyes. He called her name once, voice shaking. "Maggie!" No answer. He stood, staggering slightly, and motioned for his jacket. "She can't just walk out," he muttered. "She's my wife." But someone nearby whispered, "Not anymore." The next morning, the story made the local paper. Anniversary celebration turns to scandal. Prominent businessman exposed by wife during 60th toast. Neighbors gossiped over fences, friends texted in disbelief, and Harold Evans, once known for his charm and spotless reputation, became the town's newest cautionary tale. He stayed home for days, blinds drawn, phone off the hook. His lawyer called twice, advising him to prepare for possible asset complications. Because Maggie hadn't just humiliated him. She'd prepared everything. At her daughter's house, Maggie sat at the kitchen table with her lawyer, a calm stack of papers before her. "As of this morning," the lawyer said, "your accounts are separated. The properties have been retitled under your sole name, as per your instruction last month." Maggie nodded. "Good. I wanted him to keep the house, actually. It's too big for me, but I'll be keeping the cabin on the coast." Laura looked at her mother, speechless. "You moved everything before tonight?" Maggie sipped her tea. "I told you, darling, I was done playing the fool. When a man builds his life on lies, it's best to make sure the foundation belongs to you." That evening, Harold showed up at Laura's doorstep. He looked smaller somehow, his suit wrinkled, his eyes tired. "Maggie, please," he said. "You embarrassed me in front of everyone. We can fix this." She turned to him slowly, her voice gentle but unyielding. "Fix what, Harold? The betrayal? The years I spent loving a man who treated our marriage like a stage performance? No. Some things don't get fixed. They end." He swallowed hard. "I made a mistake." She tilted her head. "Yes. You thought I'd stay silent. He reached for her hand, but she stepped back. "You once asked what I'd do if you ever broke my heart," she said. "Do you remember what I told you?" He shook his head. "I said I'd forgive you," she murmured, "but I never promised I'd stay." And with that, she closed the door. Inside, Maggie leaned against the wall, her hand trembling slightly. Not from weakness, but from relief. 60 years had taught her many things, the power of silence, the dignity in endurance. But tonight, she'd learned the most important lesson of all, that sometimes truth isn't destruction. It's deliverance. The morning sun filtered weakly through gauzy curtains, casting thin stripes of light across Maggie's teacup. The quiet of Laura's kitchen felt like a world away from the chaos of the night before. The music, the gasps, the headlines that would no doubt ripple through town by noon. Maggie sat at the breakfast table, calm, composed, a faint shadow under her eyes, but no sign of regret. Laura hovered nearby, clutching her phone. "Mom, it's everywhere," she said, voice shaky. "People are talking about it online. The video, the photos, everything. They're calling it the Anniversary Exposé." Maggie stirred her tea gently. "Let them talk. I didn't tell the story for them. I told it for me." Her voice was steady, but Laura could see the exhaustion behind it, the kind that comes after decades of holding everything together. By midday, reporters had gathered outside Harold's estate, their microphones catching sound bites through the iron gates. "Mr. Evans, is it true your wife discovered your affair during your anniversary celebration? Did you invite your mistress to the event?" No comment, no answers. Harold stayed inside, curtains drawn, bottle half empty beside him. He'd spent the night replaying the moment over and over, the look in Maggie's eyes, the whispers that followed, the way even his closest friends had quietly slipped away. He thought of Elaine, who'd left without a word, her number now disconnected. He thought of the fortune he once controlled, his properties, his stocks, and remembered the sinking dread when his lawyer confirmed that Maggie had already moved everything to her name weeks before. All that remained was the echo of applause that had once belonged to him. Meanwhile, at Laura's home, Maggie sat with her attorney again, reviewing final signatures. "Everything's secure," the attorney said, adjusting his glasses. "The joint assets were legally transferred before last night's event. Your husband has no claim over them now." Maggie nodded. "Good. I'm not out for revenge. I just want peace and a clean start." He gave her a small, admiring smile. "You're remarkably composed, Mrs. Evans. Most people would be devastated." "Oh, I was," she said softly, looking out the window. "For years. But you learn something after 6 decades with a man who underestimates you." "What's that?" he asked. She turned back to him, eyes clear. "You don't need to raise your voice to be powerful. You just have to stop whispering." That afternoon, Laura found her mother in the garden, trimming roses. The late light caught in Maggie's hair, turning it to silver fire. "You've been quiet," Laura said, sitting beside her. "Are you sure you're okay?" Maggie smiled faintly. "I'm more than okay. For the first time in my life, I feel unclenched, free." Laura sighed. "I just don't understand how you could stay so calm through it all. You planned everything, like you knew exactly what would happen." "I did," Maggie said simply. "When I found that photograph, I realized I had 2 choices: spend the rest of my life swallowing lies or teach the truth how to stand on its own." "So you planned the whole thing?" "Every moment," Maggie's voice softened. "While Harold thought I was organizing florists and caterers, I was meeting with lawyers. He thought I was making speeches, but I was moving assets, and when he rehearsed his toast, I rehearsed my goodbye." That evening, the phone rang. Maggie glanced at the caller ID, Harold Evans. She hesitated before answering. His voice was rough, hollow. "Maggie, please, we need to talk." "There's nothing left to say, Harold." "Don't do this," he said desperately. "You've made your point. You embarrassed me enough. Can't we go back?" She let the silence stretch. "Back to what? Pretending?" "I love you," he said. "You know I do." Maggie sighed. "Love isn't what you say, Harold. It's what you protect. And you stopped protecting me a long time ago." He tried again, voice cracking. "I made mistakes." "So did I," she said quietly. "I believed you." Then, with a steady breath, she ended the call. The following week, a reporter showed up at Laura's doorstep, hoping for an interview. Maggie met her outside, polite but firm. "Mrs. Evans, the world wants to hear your side," the reporter pressed. How does it feel to expose such a long secret? Maggie smiled gently. It wasn't about exposure. It was about closure. Do you have any message for other women who might be in your place? Yes, Maggie said, her eyes soft but unflinching. You don't have to burn your world to the ground to start over. Sometimes you just have to turn on the light. A month later, the house on Maple Drive sold quietly. Harold moved into a modest apartment downtown, his name forgotten by most. Elaine disappeared from the city altogether. Maggie, on the other hand, packed her life into 3 suitcases and a box of photographs. Laura drove her to a small coastal cottage 2 hours away, a place with wide windows and endless sky. The moment Maggie stepped inside, she felt it, the stillness she'd been chasing for decades. She unpacked the last of her things and placed a single frame on the mantel, a photo from her wedding day. Then she took it down, folded it neatly, and set it inside a drawer. It wasn't anger that made her do it. It was peace.